When you were trying to feed your babies, did you have statistics or facts swirling around in your mind about the importance of feeding your babies human milk? And did that add an extra sense of pressure, knowing how critical it was to feed human milk to your babies? My guest today shares a story of grappling with these questions, not only with herself, but with her husband, who was at the time in medical school and had these statistics swirling around in his own head from his limited training in medical school when it came to knowing about the benefits of breastfeeding. So we were able to talk about this and the impact of knowing how good breastfeeding is for babies, but not getting the support you need to do so. It really doesn't help the person feeding the baby to know these long-term statistics if in the end they're just left on their own to try to feed the baby. Stephanie shares her journey of doing the best she could in the situation she was in to feed her baby human milk, and then doing the best she could for herself to transition to a different plan when that wasn't working out in the middle of COVID lockdown in Australia. This is a second story about this. So I can't wait for you to hear this story. And as you listen, think about how you discuss human milk feeding and breastfeeding with other people and the purpose of the facts that you share. Because in the end, what somebody knows about the benefits of breastfeeding doesn't actually help them to be able to feed their baby if they don't have the right supports in place. And I always like to share that what matters more than feeding human milk to human babies is having healthy families. That impacts the long-term health of the baby more than getting human milk. And so if we can support the whole health of the family, including getting them the support they need to feed their babies, amazing. But if that's not in place and the mom needs to make a different plan, or the feeding person needs to make a different plan in order to support their own mental health, then I'm all for that, because that is going to impact that long-term health of the baby as well. So I can't wait for you to hear this amazing conversation with my guest, Stephanie. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
My name is Stephanie Fornasia. I live in Australia, in Melbourne, aka Naarm, and I am on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, which is the traditional owners of the land I'm here on today, and just want to respect elders past, present, and emerging. I live with my husband, who is a resident doctor, and my son, who's 3, Casper. And I'm a psychologist by background, and I work in schools providing disability inclusion support. And I also have a podcast called Psychocinematic, and we analyze depictions of mental illness and disability in movies and TV shows, and I get people with lived experience to come and chat with me.
We met over a network for podcasters, and that's how I discovered you and your amazing podcast. I have loved it. We just recorded discussing How to Train Your Dragon. It was a really fun discussion about disability portrayal, particularly amputee portrayal. Most of my listeners know that I am an amputee, born with a congenital disability. And so I have adored those movies since they came out. I feel very positively towards them. So it was really fun to talk to somebody who analyzes this stuff as a podcaster and as somebody who is a psychologist by profession and helps people in schools to be more inclusive of people with disabilities. So really, really fun discussion. And I love the work that you do.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being involved and introducing me to an amazing film franchise, which I'll now be watching for a long time.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Well, I have brought you here today to talk about your own baby feeding story with Casper. And so before we do that, I would love to have you think about your cultural upbringing and go back into your memory bank and tell me what your exposure to baby feeding was over the years, as far back as you can remember.
I am the eldest of 3 kids. My mum formula fed all of us, and she often mentioned that she couldn't breastfeed, and it was too painful for her. When my youngest sister, when she was born, I was about 8 or 9. So, I was sometimes involved in, giving her a bottle here and there, but it was mostly, mum who did that. And she used formula. As I grew up, especially, studying psychology and developmental psychology, there was often that, message that breastfeeding is preferred. So that was kind of my understanding, I guess, and my exposure to that sort of thing.
What would you say the cultural attitudes are towards breastfeeding?
Definitely there's a culture of don't breastfeed in public. That's too much. You can't show your boob. But there's also a mentality and a few people that I knew that were very much like formula is poison. A lot of the hospitals, particularly in Melbourne, are very pro breastfeeding. And my husband, Michael, when he went through medical school, was very much given the message that breast is best. There's all these reasons why breastfeeding is best. And as someone who is male, and before we started to have a family, he sort of ascribed by that mentality. When we were trying, and I was doing a lot of reading, we had a lot of discussions about, what if I can't breastfeed? My mum couldn't breastfeed. How true is it that this is the end of the world if we use formula?
Were those conversations difficult to have? Did they cause friction between you?
Initially, yes. I think that the issue was there was so much black and white viewing going on, and my husband can be a bit black and white too. So in his training, particularly early on, he would probably, take what he was given and ascribe by that. And now that he's worked more in the field, he's sort of seeing there's shades of grey, and, what's written on paper doesn't actually always apply to every single person. So initially there was some tension there, but as it got closer to Casper being born, and as we had more conversations and sort of read up on, a variety of literature around it, it was definitely less tension in those conversations. And particularly, I have generalized anxiety disorder. I've had depression quite a few times over my life, and I was very conscious of my own mental health when giving birth. And I expressed that a lot to my husband, in that, I'm at risk of postnatal depression. So I really don't want to have that added pressure to breastfeed on top of that. So if it doesn't work out, I'd really love there to be a neutral ground around that, and there not to be a feeling like I'm failing my child if it doesn't work out the way I want it to. So he was very understanding about that. And by the time I did start to breastfeed, we were very much on the same page about it, which was good.
Yeah, I think when people see the issue as black and white, they're looking at it just from a viewpoint of what does the breast milk do for the baby
Mm-hmm.
and not looking at it holistically
Mm.
and viewing it as a systemic issue. And
Exactly, yeah.
so, yes, if we're just looking at what does breast milk do for a baby, what does formula do for a baby, absolutely 100% breast milk is best. Human milk is best. However, we don't just live in a bubble where all we do is compare breast milk to formula. We are working parents. We have various levels of support. We have various exposures to breastfeeding or not breastfeeding. We live in places where we feel the need to cover or not cover. We have various levels of pain that we may or may not be able to get help for. So we are not put into a bubble and then get to decide formula or human milk. It is way more complex than that. So in the research that I have conducted, because this really is one of the systemic barriers, is that pediatricians give a lot of advice about breastfeeding, pediatricians, gynecologists, doctors, family doctors. However, their training regarding breastfeeding is very minimal. It's like between 3 and 9 hours in medical school, which is not very much. That's like 3 class periods worth.
And that would be accurate, I think, or even a little bit less than Michael.
Okay. Right. So they have a lot of opinions. Their advice is sought out a lot. However, they don't know what they don't know. And so when their advice is sought out, they often don't realize there's so much more to human milk feeding. And so then they don't say, you know what you're asking me is quite complex. I should refer you to somebody who can really help you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the danger with medical school in that after your however many years of study before you actually go out into the field, you're given everything, like an overview of everything. So, what Michael would have learned about breastfeeding would have probably been, a page of information, which just doesn't cover the complexities of it. And on paper, something can look very black and white and simple, but that is absolutely not how it works. So, he's definitely evolved since then. And, as you go into different fields, and this is the interesting thing, he's going into the psychiatry field, which is great for me as a psychologist. But, if he was then, in 10 years' time to be asked to do something like physiological, he probably wouldn't have the skills anymore because, you hone in your skill in a certain area. So his understanding of women's health would be very minimal, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell people, even when they're working with their pediatrician, your pediatrician, you are choosing for the span of your child's life. You're not necessarily choosing them because they are best for those baby years. Mm-hmm. And so they don't have the depth of knowledge about baby feeding that you might want them to have. You might need to seek out other expertise for that. But they have all the knowledge that you're going to want them to have from the moment your baby is born until they are graduating high school and perhaps college. So it's not that they're not fantastic at what they do. It's that their knowledge is much wider than, say, a lactation consultant who is really specializing in these 6 months, 1 year, 2 years that you will be feeding human milk to your baby.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have to both help my clients to have confidence in their doctors and also help them to see when their doctors are wrong, but not erode their confidence in their baby's care providers. It can be very challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see if this played out in your story at all, but also I'm seeing that it kind of played out just in your own relationship a little bit as your husband was in medical school and he had a very narrow view of what should be happening, but it sounds like he evolved as you had the conversations. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad.
Yeah.
Did you have something to say about that?
I was just going to say, I'm very good at shutting him down when I need to, in that I'm the woman and you're the man. So whatever happens, you'll just have to deal with it.
Right. I heard that in your episode on the movie Tully.
Yeah.
He was your co-host on that episode. And one of the ideas I had thrown out to you that we discussed was the movie Tully, but you said, oh, I actually already did it. And so I wanted to go back and listen to it because I had just recently watched the movie, and the movie portrays, it's hard to identify what it portrays because it's never named, but perinatal mental illness or perinatal.
I guess it's perinatal psychosis.
You two go back and forth about what it actually is in the movie.
Yeah.
But in the end, in your description of it, and I'll link your episode to it in my show notes because it's a great episode for my listeners to dig into as an introduction to your podcast, because it's this movie that really portrays this theme that comes up a lot in my podcast. People have talked about a psychosis multiple times on my show, but also just perinatal depression, perinatal anxiety. But there were a couple of times when he had an opinion and you're like, I am the one who has experienced postpartum anxiety. And I can't remember if you said you had experienced postpartum depression or not, but you were like, I think I know what a woman is going through at this time. And I'm not sure that you can exactly say what it would be like.
Yes, I love that you enjoyed that. I think sometimes our opposing views, I think we hopefully do it with respect with each other at the same time. And
oh, yes.
Yeah, he tends to agree with me when I have to, play the I'm the woman card.
Yes. Last night, as a family, we had the rare opportunity to just have one child at home. We had not eaten dinner yet, and it was getting pretty late, but we asked him, it's just the three of us. What would you like to do? And my son said he wanted to take a walk at a nearby reservoir. And neither my husband and I were stressed out about this because we had a refrigerator full of Feast and Fettle, which had delivered home-cooked meals right to our front door that we knew when we came home from our walk, all we would have to do was just heat and serve it. So off we went on our walk right around sunset, around the reservoir. It was beautiful, just the three of us and our dog. And then we came home, and within 15 minutes, we had the most delicious coconut crusted cod and roasted cauliflower. And we ate it while we played Uno together. And the cleanup was so easy. And it made our evening so amazing after a full day of work and allowed us to connect with our child. And this is why I am so happy that Feast and Fettle is a partner of the podcast, because I truly believe that anything that allows families to spend more time together and less time worrying about all the things they need to do, like getting dinner on the table, is something I can get behind. So if you would like to see what Feast and Fettle can do for your family, go to feastandfettle.com and use my code MILK to get $30 off your first week's order. And let somebody else do the cooking for you and just go take that walk. If you want to have less anxiety and more confidence so that your parenting journey can feel like you always wanted it to feel, then go to my website right now so that you can have a person by your side who not only knows how you feel, but who combines my expertise of lactation with your expertise of your body and your baby to help you make the next right step in your lactation journey, because that's all you really need to do is make the next right step. And right now, that next right step is going to my website, www.quavinbirthservices.com. And I can't wait to see your name pop up in my inbox or on my phone, on my text messages. Talk to you soon. Okay, so getting back to your own experience, so you had some worry about what feeding would be like based on hearing your mom's experience, based on knowing what your own struggles with mental health had been like. And so tell me a little bit about what your hopes for baby feeding were, and then you can kind of go into what it was like for you.
I really wanted to breastfeed. I really hoped that would work. But at the same time, I didn't want to put pressure on myself, unnecessary pressure on myself. And I did sort of have in the back of my head, fed is still best, in that, breast is preferred, but at the end of the day, as long as my baby's being fed, that's what's important. Because this was as COVID was heating up, there was a lot less access to prenatal classes that usually would have been provided. But I did manage to go to a breastfeeding class. I didn't love it. We had to sort of practice and, learn how the latch worked. There was a slight bit of shaming going on. And because I'm a psychologist and I constantly have my psychologist hat on, I couldn't help but be a little bit critical in that they talked about all the risk factors of your child not breastfeeding, and also kids who are breastfed tend to have higher IQ and tend to achieve more in these areas and have less colds and flus, etc. I had been reading a little bit and listening to, a few podcasts about, scientific sort of based podcasts about breastfeeding and things like that, knowing that, and in the back of my head going, how does that make people feel if they can't breastfeed? Like their kids are going to be quote unquote not smarter or not do well at school. Like that's a very broad assumption to make and can be quite shaming. So I didn't come away from that class feeling very good. And so in the back of my head going, okay, well, I still believe that, whatever happens, it's going to be okay as long as my baby's fed, but also feeling like now there's an added sort of shame if it doesn't work out from the hospital staff at the hospital that I was going to be giving birth in. So yeah, and the hospital that I did give birth in very much promoted themselves as a breastfeeding hospital. While that was a positive thing because that's where I was hoping to go, it was also like there's that expectation that you will you will be breastfeeding, and if you don't, well, you failed, sort of thing.
We need to come to the table assuming that all families want the best for their babies.
Exactly.
That just needs to be the underlying assumption. And if they want the best for their babies, then what support do they need to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And let's assume that the parents know what is best for their babies. Mm-hmm. Let's assume that they are the ones who are going to know what their babies need. And yes, education is a part of the conversation when it comes to breastfeeding, but that is not the education that needs to be provided. Like, who cares whether or not an IQ could possibly be raised if you breastfeed?
I had so many problems with even giving that message, and also correlation and causation being, not the same thing.
These are the types of statistics that we want to look at a policy level when we're trying to figure out how to help governments put funding into the right places to build robust support systems. Those are not the types of statistics we use on an individual level to help people to feed their babies. That's not the right use for those types of statistics.
Thank you for saying that. I'm going to record that and play that to people now who ever cite those kind of statistics, because I just don't find them useful in any individual way. And yeah, I found that.
No, they're not.
Frustrating.
Yeah. That's what you use on a broader level when you're like, look, this is the reason why you need money to go to these resources. When you're trying to convince policymakers. But it's not what you're trying to tell a mother who's like trying to make decisions for her baby. She doesn't need to know that stuff. Like it's irrelevant in that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you said you had to practice positioning, what did that even look like?
So we were given a baby and we were sort of shown, what the position would have been to latch onto the breast, and we were also we were given like a sort of breast, but it was a while ago. I don't think we did anything.
Was it like a knitted breast?
Yeah, it was knitted.
Or a silicone breast? Okay. Okay.
But it was just sort of practicing how to hold your baby and how to hold how to hold your breast to express as well. From my memory, that was kind of what was sort of shown and what was practiced.
Part of my brain is thinking, okay, done in the right way, practicing like how to, because I see a lot of people holding their baby in a way that actually doesn't help them get their airway clear for breastfeeding.
Yeah, I think we practiced holding the baby in the right position and how to sort of guide your boob into where the baby's mouth would be.
But was it awkward being in a like class
yes.
type setting
yes,
with other strangers? Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was only a couple of hours. And yeah, it was the only sort of thing I had access to. So it was definitely not enough.
Yeah. Can you think of a way that having that type of education could be done better?
I feel like it would have been nice to have maybe more individual access. And again, this was during COVID.
Yes.
So, resources were already very limited. Yeah, having maybe access to someone individually in a prenatal appointment to sort of talk through things and actually be able to physically show me what the position would be and check some of that messaging being a little bit more pressure-less would have been good too.
What ended up happening for you?
Well, the birth itself was a bit complicated. I was in labor for 27 hours, which is definitely not the longest someone's been in labor for, but it was very long. I was also asked to collect colostrum leading up to it to have a bit of a store if there was any need to feed the baby and not be able to breastfeed. I ended up having high blood pressure at a good part during the labor and was having to be treated by antibiotics. And because Casper was inside me, he also had to be treated with antibiotics as well, because if he also had the infection, that could have been really bad. Once he was born, he was whisked away into special care pretty quickly. And I also had to go into my own room and be treated with IV antibiotics to make sure the infection was gone. So I really didn't have a lot of contact time with him. And I had a epidural and a forceps delivery. He was on my chest for a while and I did try to give him my breast, but he had to go quite quickly. So I didn't really get the opportunity to try breastfeeding at all. That was actually a really dark time.
Because it was COVID, your husband couldn't come and be a support person?
Well, he was in special care with Casper. And during that time, Michael was with Casper and they gave him formula pretty quickly. They ran out of the colostrum. I think I only collected about 6 small syringes. And so they asked me.
That's a good amount.
I was pretty impressed and I thought, oh, I'm going to make lots of milk. Not long that they told Michael, look, we're going to have to give him some formula. Do you consent? And Michael, we all had no sleep. He just said, yeah. I would have liked to have the opportunity, even though I was absolutely wiped and probably dead asleep, to at least have tried to breastfeed at that point to establish that. And I know they were worried about my health. In my head, though, I was like, I'm fine. I'm just tired. But I obviously had an infection. So obviously there was definitely that barrier to being able to do that. But I just would have been like to at least be asked. So it was a really, really hard time because I wanted to spend time with my new baby and also try breastfeeding as much as possible. But also I get into trouble for not being in my room to get my medication. It's like...
And it had to be delivered by IV antibiotics. They didn't have another way of delivering the antibiotics to you.
Yeah, they took the IV out, and I could just have it orally. But yeah, I think it was like 72 hours of IV antibiotics. Yeah, once I was with him, I remember latching the first time and going, hey, it's worked. It's fine. It's going well. And just keeping on going. But he wasn't really latching properly. But no one really came up to sort of actually see if I was doing it right. They were just like, okay, you're breastfeeding, you're good, bye. And by the last day when he was in the room with me, it looked like it wasn't going as well as it sort of looked. Also, from the first day after the birth, I started pumping pretty quickly, and it took a while for the milk to come through. So pumping every time he needed a feed, really. Breastfeeding for as long, I think I was timing it too, like 10 minutes on one breast, 10 minutes on the other, and then feeding him any colostrum I had, and then topping up with a bit of formula as well, and doing that every time he needed.
So that's really quadruple feeding.
Yeah. So it was really exhausting, and I'm glad we spent that last day in hospital because I got a little bit more support around the breastfeeding. But there was one moment when I had to ask them to heat up the bottle for formula, or to give me some formula. And that was always reliant on the nurses actually being able to give me the formula. And then there was one time where I was requesting the formula that I needed, and she said, this is a breastfeeding hospital. And I was like, yes. She's like, so you should be just breastfeeding. I was just like, okay.
What?
Go away. I didn't ask for this. And what, should I just let him starve? I don't know.
It's like putting breastfeeding hospital in the title is automatically just makes everybody breastfeed their babies perfectly. That just solves the problem.
That was all that needed to happen.
It just eliminates the systemic barriers.
Done. Fixed. So yeah, she wasn't very nice.
We just call all the hospitals breastfeeding hospitals, and suddenly everybody can just feed their babies human milk. Why didn't we think of this sooner?
That's what they need to do for everything.
What a brilliant idea.
So yeah, that was...
Oh my God.
That was rough. And then coming home, yeah, we were very tired, very happy to have this baby, but very isolated, and continued with the triple feeding for 5 weeks. It was just too much. My milk did come in.
Okay, Stephanie.
Yeah.
I want to stop you for just a second. I want to sit with the fact that you quadruple fed for 5 long weeks. That is a long ass time.
It was
to do that.
Thank you for that, because it felt like I'd given up on it after that 5-week point. Like, you couldn't do it.
No,
something.
We asked new parents to do this triple feeding plan, which is ridiculous. It is so much work. It takes so much time. It does not get to the root cause, and it is freaking exhausting. And to put somebody on that plan with no end date, fine. 2 or 3 days, fine. Somebody can get through 2 or 3 days. But to do that for 5 weeks, that is a long time. You must have been exhausted. And I just want to stop and acknowledge that. I know it's been a couple of years now, but I don't know if anybody ever acknowledged that for you, that was a long time. That is a lot of work, a lot of hours, and you must have been exhausted. And I just want to say, if nobody has said it, 5 weeks is a long time for triple feeding.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very validating. By the end of it at night, I wasn't pumping at night. I would just breast and milk feed. But it would also be like breastfeed, give them some breast milk, express breast milk, and top up with formula. So it was still a lot.
Yeah.
We weren't getting much sleep.
No.
So in Melbourne, you have the maternal child health nurses that connect with you at different milestones throughout your child's life until they turn 4, and it's free. It's through the government. And usually there would be a nurse that visits you at home a couple of times. And about 3 weeks in, they discovered Casper had a tongue tie, which wasn't picked up until
And who discovered that?
It was one of the maternal child health nurses who we saw face to face. So she recommended getting it snipped and thought that that would help the latch and the breastfeeding process. Because my milk was slow, but also Casper wouldn't latch very well. And it would be hard, when you know that the milk's coming out, and there was a lot of not thinking it was coming out. So we did get it snipped, and I was, reassured that, it's very quick, it's painless. Like, he screamed, but, it goes away very quickly. It is recommended. But it really didn't make any difference. And it feels like a short period of time, like after 2 weeks, being like, no, it's not making any difference. But when you think about how many times your child is feeding in that 2 weeks period, it was pretty clear that the problem was still there, or whether that contributed to the problem, but the way that Casper was feeding was already established and it wasn't reversing it by snipping it. I feel like I tried everything I could with the nurse's advice, but it just never felt like he was wasn't being able to latch well enough in order to be able to stop the triple feeding. And by 5 weeks, I was done. I was mentally done. And I had to sort of weigh up, do I keep suffering through this for my baby's nutritional needs, but with my mental health being impacted and potentially our bond being impacted for that reason, or figure that he's going to be fine, the formula will be fine, and maintain a little bit more sanity. So that was and Michael was very much like, you just stop, you've done enough. So
yeah, I think once a partner who feels a little bit rigid about breast milk is nutritionally better, once they see the anguish that a person goes through to try to produce the breast milk, they become a lot less rigid, at least a reasonable person. Because they recognize that it really is so much effort that the person producing the milk is going through when it is not working out as intended, or when there is not a lot of support in being able to produce the milk for the baby. And so then it just becomes your whole world starts to revolve around feedings, and you're not enjoying parenthood as you thought you would. Everything starts to be about the feedings, which isn't the way motherhood is supposed to be.
And there's a lot of view, because formula is not cheap, that breastfeeding is inexpensive, it's free, but the amount of time it takes, if you don't value your time, then it is free. But it's actually, it's a lot of time that goes into it, and time also costs money, really. Having said that, I still pump.
Yeah, neither choice is free.
No, exactly. There's a cost always.
Right.
I did pump for 5 months, I think it was. I wanted to make it to 6, but I would 5 months was enough, and gave him express breast milk and formula as sort of combination. So because I was able to pump, like the pump was doing better than Casper, I think. So I thought, might as well just keep pumping and giving him this breast milk, and at least he's getting some of my antibodies. I felt pretty okay with finishing the pumping at 5 months and switching just to formula, because I thought, look, I've done as best I can. I was less stressed about that.
I love, first of all, that at no point did you feel like it was all or nothing. When you decided to end the body feeding, you recognized that you could continue to feed the human milk through pumping, which is always a valid choice. We never have to it's never black and white. So sometimes we feel like we have to fully end breastfeeding, fully switch to formula. And if somebody wants to do that, absolutely, that is an option. And I help people do that all the time and figure out the safest way to wean, because ending weaning automatically right away can sometimes lead to infection and be unsafe. And so doing it in a way that's safe for everybody is really important. But to recognize, okay, what is my biggest pain point here? It's latching. So I'm going to end latching and see how that goes. And then you were able to continue that for 5 months, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And I think there was, there's also that sort of fear of failure of not being able to bond with your child through breastfeeding and through that contact. But there's other ways I can bond with Casper in so many ways. And I don't feel like our bond has been in any way diminished from not having that contact breastfeeding for more than that 5 weeks. In fact, if I had struggled through it, maybe that would have affected our bond because I wouldn't have been as present and a regulated mother as I could have been. So,
absolutely. Great breastfeeding increases the bond, but stressful breastfeeding does not. So we have to make sure that we have a nuanced conversation around this.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you are anxious when you are trying to attach your baby and that never improves, it is actually better to have a parent who is fully present with their child. Not that any of us are ever fully present all the time, but to have a parent who is capable of being more present more of the time than it is to have more breast milk. That is clear in the data.
Yeah.
And so we need to have more nuanced conversations around this. It's not just about breast is best. I love human milk. I am an advocate of human milk, but what I am an advocate for is people having the support they need to feed their babies human milk. And if they don't have that support, then I am an advocate of people feeling like they're making the choices that are best for their family so that they can be fully present for their family, human milk or no.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
I was going to ask how you knew that Casper was not transferring milk. What were the signs that made you worry about his milk transfer from your body?
I can kind of feel when it was flowing, and I did get that sort of rush of serotonin or oxytocin when he would latch. He would feed for a really, really, really long period of time and never sort of feel satisfied. And yeah, because I was also timing his feeds as well using an app, and it would be like 20 minutes, 20 minutes, or 30 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's like, this is so long and he's still going. He mustn't be getting enough. And then he would take formula after that. So clearly he wasn't sated. Yeah, just looking at, the data over time, it would never really improve, given he was also growing as well. So it always felt like he was taking in much more formula than I was probably producing, to the point that, by the end of that 5 weeks, I was like, I don't even know if he's getting anything, because he was still getting the express breast milk and the formula. And that would sort of equal to what he kind of needed at that sort of period of his development. So it was kind of feeling like this is not really giving him what he needs.
And were you in any pain at all while he was nursing?
I wasn't ever very super comfortable, and my nipples were very chapped and sore, but it wasn't like intense pain. And I don't know how to compare what other people feel, whether it's more painful for them. But yeah, it never felt fully comfortable, but also in my head, breastfeeding's never comfortable. But that's just,
okay,
the experience I've had.
Did it feel kind of like a chompy sensation?
Yeah, definitely a chomp.
Okay. I don't know if you're going to have any other kids, but a good latch should not feel chompy. And so that is an indication that something was going on with that latch. It was probably related to the tethered oral tie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if a nurse was identifying that tethered oral tie. She was probably seeing an anterior tie, a more forward tie,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is really easy to identify.
Yeah.
But there are other ties,
Mm.
and it takes specialists who are trained in tethered oral ties to see those.
Mm.
And often, if there are more ties present, like a posterior tie, sometimes there are also buccal ties, which are on the side. Lip tie is a little more controversial, upper lip tie, but sometimes if there are other ties present, that chomp will continue. There will be really long feeds. Milk transfer will not happen. And then also there's other work that needs to happen. And some parents say, you know what, I am totally fine pumping or giving formula, and I don't want to do all this work. Some parents look at the evidence that's available and say, you know what, this is going to impact my child long term. There is not, there's some controversial evidence. So what I like to do with my clients is say, here's the evidence. You decide for yourself what decisions you want to make around this, and I will support you in helping you feed the baby the way that you would like to feed your baby. But it sounds like there was definitely some interference happening that did not get fully resolved. And when somebody says, yep, tongue tie, go get it clipped, but then you don't get any further support after that, like, of course you're going to continue to struggle. And that's the point I'm trying to bring up is when you then still continue to feel like something is wrong with my body, something's wrong with me and my baby. Instead of feeling like there is a reason for this. And when people know, okay, there's a reason, now I can make an informed decision based on the reason, then you feel better and you can say, okay, yes, I want to go on to see if I can improve the situation. Or, you know what, I would rather just switch to formula and know that this wasn't my fault and not carry the guilt with you that people often carry.
Yeah, that would have been super helpful. And it's interesting, when I was at the appointment where the tongue tie was snipped, she watched me breastfeed and she was like, oh, that's a weird way to do it. That's not how you should be doing it. You should be doing it this way. And like, this was 3 weeks into it. Like, no one's told me that. But then carrying on from there, because it never really worked, even doing it, holding him the way she suggested, it still felt like, well, I couldn't do it.
When you tell somebody that's a weird way to do it, like that's like saying, oh, your mother instincts haven't kicked in.
Yeah.
Let me help you become a better mother.
That's how it felt. Yeah. Her bedside manner wasn't the best. I was very much like, I don't want to feel like I failed. If it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. But I've done a lot of self-reflection over the years and I kind of felt like I was a place where, I wouldn't let it get to me, but it's never what you imagine it to be. And given the time that it was as well, with a lot of supports not being there and also feeling so isolated, you can have the best mindset in the world, but you can still feel like a failure. And it's because of all the circumstances around you. Yeah.
There's only so much our own mantras and self-reflection can do to counteract that. And of course, with time and reflection and healing, we can, but it takes a lot. And when you're right in the thick of it, it's really hard to brush it off.
I would also just attribute it to COVID depression as well.
Yes.
But when you're in that state, you kind of feel like this is the way it's going to be forever. So it's very hard to see yourself in a few years' time and go, am I going to think, oh, I failed when, Casper's running around and going to school and stuff? In that moment, it's very hard to put yourself in those shoes. So yeah, it feels really, really desperate and distressing.
I think that's why naming these barriers is so important, and helping people to see that they are not failures is so important, because I have found that even if people aren't directly relating it, these doubts of motherhood, the reason why people have to go into moms groups and ask, like, what should I pack my kids for lunch? Or how should I respond to the teacher when they say this? when they are in elementary school is because the doubt got planted in their earliest days and weeks and months when they felt like they weren't a good enough mother when it came to baby feeding, for instance. And so I really do think that it is a bigger issue than just baby feeding. We aren't able to trust ourselves in those first days and weeks and months because it gets taken away from us by all these professionals who say, "Oh, you can't, you're not supposed to do it that way, do it this way," because culturally we have lost a lot of these ways of interacting with our babies. And so we have to kind of rely on these professionals to teach us, but the professionals themselves don't really know. And so then they just treat us like we're a bunch of idiots who don't know how to care for our babies. And then we feel like idiots. And then it carries through.
Yeah, exactly.
I hear this all the time. And sometimes by the time people come to me, they are so discombobulated. They have heard 10 things from 10 different people. And so I try to sit down and say, okay, what have you heard? What has helped? What has resonated? What do you need from me? Because I don't want to just be another voice telling you what to do. Like, how can I really help you to figure out the situation? And I work in a hospital 2 days a month only on the postpartum unit. And sometimes by the time I've seen them on day 2, they've already heard 10 different things from 10 different people. And they're so confused. They're like, well, this nurse told me to feed X number of minutes for, every X number of hours. And this nurse told me to feed in this position. And this nurse told me to feed in that position. And this nurse told me to use a nipple shield. And this nurse told me not to use a nipple shield. And they already feel so confused. And it's only day 2.
Yeah, I definitely had that experience as well.
As we're wrapping up here, I want to know, once you made that decision at the 5-week mark to feed formula and to pump as much as you could, how did that change the game for you as far as your own feelings about yourself and your motherhood?
I think there was a lot of emotion to start with, and leading up to it, I was really not in a very good state. But as soon as the decision was made, it felt like some of that pressure gradually started to go away. Just getting more sleep at night. And also, I stopped pumping at night. So my husband and I could, actually have shifts of who fed when. For that first year of Casper's life, or 8 months, he had equal access to me and him, or Dad. Although, Dad was busy in the office, but, whenever I needed him, he could be there. So we were able to really equalize the parenting even more, which just took such a load off me. I definitely had my down moments still, and, COVID was still had no end in sight. So lockdowns continued until Casper was about 18 months old, saw home a lot more than anywhere else, and didn't really see much of his family members. I was very comfortable with that decision. And then to the point, by that 5-month mark, I was very, very comfortable switching to formula. And yeah, that also was just very, very much more convenient than the pumping as well.
What did you do with your pump once you were fully done?
I wanted to throw it in the bin, but they're very expensive. It was a Medela, so the good one. But I actually videoed myself putting it in the cupboard and then giving it the finger.
You did?
Yes. But, if we do have a second child, which we haven't fully decided on, but pumps are super expensive. So I can pass that on to another mum that needs it, and, make things a bit cheaper for them. Yeah, you can't throw them in the bin. They're too precious.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love that. I'm glad I asked that question. I've never really asked it before, but it's so great that you put it in the cabinet and gave it the bird.
It's like, thank you, but also I hate you.
Well, I so appreciate your honesty in talking about what it was like for you to go into this experience fully wanting to breastfeed, knowing that it might be difficult for you given your family history, and then being in the middle of COVID and having so little support. I think every person who gave birth in the middle of lockdown deserves a reward of some sort.
There was definitely silver linings. Like, it was really nice not having to have visitors constantly coming to see your baby.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first in my family,
Yes.
first grandchild. And it did give us a lot of time to bond and just enjoy the time with your baby.
Mm-hmm. Well, your story definitely shines a light on a lot of the failings of our systems.
Mm-hmm.
And you did the best you could, given all that you had to face and given such a lack of support that exists, not just in Melbourne where you are, but everywhere, and in some places more than others. So I so appreciate you taking the time to share the story. And if my listeners want to reach out to you and find you on all the socials and everything, where can they do that?
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking about the experience. It's also, I got a little bit teary before there, just with that very validating message that 5 weeks is a long time. So thank you. You can listen to my podcast on all good podcast apps, Psychocinematic. I also have a website, www.psychocinematicpodcast.com. I'm going to spell Psychocinematic because it's a mouthful. Psychocinematic. I apologize for having such a long podcast name. I'm also on Instagram at Psychocinematic Podcast, Twitter at Psychocinematic Podcast, and TikTok at Psychocinematic.
Awesome. And I'll have all of that linked in the show notes so that it can easily be clicked on and found. And I have so appreciated spending my morning with you. We had a good long morning together, recording back to back. So this has been such a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for waking up bright and early for me.
I hope that you will take Stephanie's story and recognize that our words have impact, and that we can talk to people until we're blue in the face about the benefits of anything, about the benefits of healthy eating, about the benefits of exercise, about the benefits of feeding our babies human milk. But until we offer real support to them, they are the ones who have to live their lives. And so the real way that we can be supportive is to listen to them and to hear what they need from us in any given moment. And sometimes that really is just to be a listening ear. And sometimes that's what I offer my clients, even as an IBCLC. So let's keep that in mind as we seek to be supportive friends and partners and professionals, that we are facing so many barriers when it comes to providing care and support to our babies and providing them the best lives we possibly can. And that means different families have to make different decisions based on their personal circumstances. If you would like to discuss these barriers, and if you would like to discuss the ways that having these statistics in your own mind impacted you, then come join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. I would love to hear how having those statistics in your mind either positively or negatively impacted your baby feeding journey, because I know for different people that plays out in different ways. So join me there. I'd love to see you and talk about that. I just want to remind you that if you are looking for a way to spend more time with your family and less time stressing about all the things you have to do in your life, go to feastoffettle.com. So I don't order every week, but if I look at my calendar for the upcoming week and I see that I have a lot of consults coming up and I don't have as much time to plan for meals, then I will place an order for the next week and I'll know that I have meals taken care of for that week. So get $30 off your first week's delivery at feastoffettle.com by entering my code MILK, MILK.